Thank you very much. It's very nice being here with you. I'm sorry I was a little bit late, but I just finished my classes and there's a little bit of traffic from Haverford. You won't believe it, but there's traffic. So I want to thank very much Villanova University for this invitation. I feel very honored. I would like to thank Raul for this invitation, and also I would like to acknowledge I'm very happy to have very close Raul and Tomás, because they are peers that I can have a lot of exchange, and we have common interests. So I'm more than happy to be here with you and to make some comments about most recent Raul's book, which I find very, very exciting, very interesting. So I started to do like an academic paper and I end up with a lot of questions, so I want to switch from a little bit of academic reflection into more like a talk or exchange of ideas, of issues that this book is addressing, and I find it very, very, I welcome this book. I'm very happy that someone has had this idea of talking about the movement hashtag Yo Soy 132 Mexico. So I want to start with a small quote from Luis Althusser. So he's talking about the aleatory encounter. And so he says, every encounter is aleatory, not only in its origins. Nothing ever guarantees an encounter, but also in its effects. In other words, every encounter might not have taken place, although it did take place. But its possible non-existence sheds light on the meaning of its aleatory being. And every encounter is aleatory in its effects, in that nothing in the elements of the encounter prefigures, before the actual encounter, the contours and determinations of the being that will emerge from it. So I think this is the case of the movement hashtag Yo Soy 132. Last Monday, this Monday, around the world, many of us joined a global action for Ayotzinapa. In Mexico City, there were around 30,000 people who attended the protest for demanding truth and justice for the 43 Ayotzinapa students who were disappeared 2 years ago. And the more than 28,000 disappeared persons as a result of organized crime and state violence in the last 10 years. Attendees almost represent the number of people disappeared during the last decade. The number of people who were disappeared during the dictatorship in Argentina also. On May 2012, a group of students forced Enrique Peña Nieto, who was running at that time for presidential elections, to remember his responsibility in Atenco's repression in 2006. During which more than 30 women were raped as part of public forces operations. Atenco's protesters were opposing to convert their crop fields into an extension of the international airport in Mexico City. In the wake of the right-wing party's erosion after 12 years in power, Mexican unrest for the already intangible everyday violence, the citizens' distrust in parties as avenue of political representation. And the threat it represented, the returning of the PRI to power. So in this context, the movement hashtag Yo Soy 132 was groundbreaking, and it meant a blast of fresh air. No one could foretell the tragedy of Ayotzinapa on September the 26th in Iguala. No one expected the resonance and support that relatives of disappeared students had around the world and still have after 2 years. No one could imagine that after 6 years, young students from a private university, middle class, usually seen as apolitical or lethargic youngsters, a young generation probably with non-experience in political matters and political action, so they became the memory of Atenco's repression. And they hunted Enrique Peña Nieto during his candidacy. The movement already spread around among public and private universities, were able to organize a very professional debate with presidential candidates, which was streamed online. So this is historical. This was a demonstration of how low budget and very successful civil society's intervention in politics. It challenged television networks in Mexico, which delivered a very mediocre and regulated debate a couple of days before. Furthermore, the movement unleashed support of thousands that took action when Peña Nieto took power on December the 1st. Of course, the protest on December the 1st, 2012 was repressed, and some of the protesters are still in jail since then. These eruptions and their effects that probably no one could foretell are very close to what Althusser described as aleatory encounters, highlighting the powerful source of freedom and never-ending possibility or not of these encounters. Actually, these encounters have been happening recurrently around the world, but it is the case I would like to focus on Mexico. Even though hashtag Yo Soy 132 do not have a direct memory of the 1968 student movement, I find some undeniable connections with the 68 movement in terms of its contingency, marking a watershed in civil society and political actions, refreshing the seriousness of politics, having long-term effects even if you find both were dismembered by the government's repression and persecution. So in both cases, they were dismantled and they were persecuted. Also, in both cases, movements started after grassroots movements have been smashed and independent labor unions were losing visibility. This was the case for Mexico with the SMENO, the labor union of the electric workers. So they have been struggling for a couple of years, and at that time they were very not very visible anymore. So that's when the Yo Soy 132 arrived. So what's hashtag Yo Soy 132 differs from the 68 student movement is its capacity of dissemination. Probably the correct term will be precisely viral, and the use of technology as a participative tool in almost real time of events. In other words, its immediacy. Certainly this model of participation may be compared to the non-hierarchical organization of the National Strike Council of the 1968 movement. But times for consensus in assembly were way too long for coordinated actions by big brigades on the streets. That was one of the big issues of the 1968 movement. So, for the hashtag Yo Soy 132, this was not an issue since social networks were acting as means for organizing and also as means for coordinating actions, or calling for actions. Briefly, I have made a broad argument for the relevance of hashtag Yo Soy 132. And in this token, I do celebrate the steps Raul has taken to analyze, compile, and publish very valuable insights and reflections about the movement and what it means in Mexican and international context for political and social movements. If the movement hashtag Yo Soy 132 itself challenged the way of doing politics, the way of organizing and calling for demonstrations, as well as finding innovative ways of representation and self-representation, Del Internet a las Calles challenges traditional academic work, not only by its interdisciplinary approach, but also by the object of research. Some would argue it's an event, so Yo Soy 132 is a social movement way too close to have an objective analysis. But I think the opposite. I think it's really amazing. Moreover, the spirit of the project could not betray its own call and decided to combine the format of a book with a bonus track or complement on the web, which we will be seeing shortly. I would like to leave more room for Raul for explaining us the project, his experience, and probably have a tour in the web. Yeah, sure. But therefore, I also would like to highlight a couple of topics or controversies that the book addresses itself. So these are part of the discussion that I would like to invite you. So basically, well, I have 4 points, but I think there are more. So one of them is the democratization of the media in the wake of the telecommunications reform that finally was approved during the first year of Peña Nieto's term. One of the targets of the movement #Yo Soy 132 was precisely against the monopoly of broadcast networks and the possibility of breaking it through social networks. An example of that was precisely the presidential debate that students organized. Nonetheless, there has been criticism to the internet and cyber users to having too much candid optimism or blind faith that social networks are an emancipatory tool. So that would be a question that we could address. So what are the reach of internet as emancipatory tool? Are there limitations? And if we want to discuss about that. The second point, I think, is the spontaneity of this movement, as many of them, probably also as the 1968 movement, and probably also as Ayotzinapa. It's aleatory. There's an aleatory encounter. And it's also anti-systematic. It has an anti-systematic core versus the ephemeral nature of these movements. The evanescence feature of the web versus a long-term movement and a perceptible change of things. So have things changed after the #Yo Soy 132? Its capability for long-term effects and reach versus a short-term eruption of unrest. So this is something that I think has been debated or discussed. I think it would be a great idea to talk about this. Another point would be the interconnectivity between the web and the demonstrations and actions on the streets. So all these topics are addressed in the book. So I'm just I'm stealing from the ideas from the book. So this interconnectivity between the website and also the demonstration outside on the streets. Of course, I will have a great article from Benjamin Arici that he puts into context of the Spring Arab and also the from Spain. So. 15M, that's the movement in Spain, and so what is this interconnection between the website and the demonstration outside on the street, and how it has affected, well, how nowadays demonstrations are organized. Is this leading a new way of social movements? Are they leaving aside people or generations who do not have access to internet? Is it a tool or a new way for controlling dissidents? Also, it is known that people who participated in the movement, they have been followed, attacked, and localized through the internet. Okay, that's another topic I would like to address. And the last one, the power of representation of a young population who does not feel represented anymore by traditional avenues, and let's say by political parties. The self-representation and empowerment of civil society without hierarchies versus, and that's what I would like to, that's the tension I would like to address, the selfie mania. Is it enough just clicking on the website, and is this participating in making activism? And I think, well, one of the articles addresses that, how it changed. And those are the things that I would like to address. And at the end, I would like to share with you a quote that, for me, that's the answer to these questions. But first, I would like to leave room having this discussion.
Thank you very much, Aurelia, for all these great ideas that you have addressed around my book. I'm very happy that you found these four interesting topics to discuss. And I'm very happy to be here with my colleagues, with many of my students who are taking my classes or who were my students in the previous semester, with new colleagues from Drexel University, with activists of Norristown. Thank you very much. And I'm very, very happy to talk about my book. And before answering your questions, I would like to talk about the name of Yo Soy 132, where it comes from, the name, because I think we have been speaking about Yo Soy 132 without answering. So on May 11 of 2012, in the moment that the presidential campaign was coming to the last 2 months before the presidential elections, the media, the mass media, specifically Televisa and TV Azteca, who are like the major producers of TV programs in Mexico, and even the polls were claiming that Enrique Peña Nieto was far away from the other candidate who was behind him. So we're speaking about 17% points of distance between one candidate and the other. So there was like not too much interest on the political campaign anymore, because people were completely seduced by the idea that Enrique Peña Nieto was going to be the president. There was nothing else that they could do to change the results on the election. So there was like a complete state of calm behind the elections. Televisa was controlling very much the political figure of Enrique Peña Nieto. He had like all the support of the mass media, and everything seemed to be very, very quiet. Until Peña Nieto arrives to the Ibero University, Universidad Iberoamericana, who is a Jesuit university. Most of the students are from middle classes and high classes. And they had been characterized for being conservative, although they had been they have a strong culture on human rights and social justice, but the kind of students, they do politics in a very conservative way compared to political institutions from public schools like Universidad Autónoma de Mexico, where Aurelia comes from. No? So you know where the fire comes from. No? So from that perspective, they were not expecting to have any demonstrations against Enrique Peña Nieto. They were expecting to have like a very quiet audience that will be supporting Enrique Peña Nieto during his speech at the university. But in the moment that he arrives to the university, the students receive him as if they were in a carnival. They were using masks of the former president of Mexico, Carlos Hernandez Rivera. They wrote very beautiful cartels saying, "We don't forget Atenco," which is the movement that Aurelia was just mentioning about the peasants who oppose this kind of modernization project of the Mexican state to build an airport in their lands. They were remembering also the 1,000 cases of feminicides in the state of Mexico, like the women killing during the administration of Enrique Peña Nieto. So Enrique Peña Nieto was completely vulnerable in front of the students. Enrique Peña Nieto came with his group of politicians, with staff, and he's in the auditorium giving his speech, his political plan for campaigning, and at the latest moment, he makes a claim that really makes the students very angry. That the use of the force and the use of the police intervention, it was something that he decided because he was the governor of the state of Mexico, and he had the right to use the force to control any kind of social demonstration against the state power. So he was pretty much claiming that any governor can use the violence at any time they want, if they feel they need to use it. So the students were completely angry, and they persecute and they hound Enrique Peña Nieto during all his speech at the university, and they make him leave the university. But before leaving the university, he had to hide in the restrooms of the university because he was unable to leave the university. So the mass media respond in a very interesting way. First, they said that the protesters of the students were not legitimate because they didn't look too young for being students. So they were questioning if they were students. protesting at the Universidad Iberoamericana,
Or they were paid by the
or
left
if they were paid by the
position.
left-wing candidate, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, or if they were representing other political parties. So the students were very angry, and 2 days later they decided to call for a very interesting dynamic on Facebook that they would send to one of the main student organizers a very short video of 5 or 7 seconds with the students responding to the camera, saying their name with their credential of the university, and saying what kind of career they were studying at the university to make this protest legitimate. So you have 131 student responses to the mass media and to the political staff of Enrique Peña Nieto. So when they talk to the camera, they say, we are students, we were not trained to disrupt the intervention of Enrique Peña Nieto, we were not paid by the left-wing candidate, and this is a legitimate protest from people that don't feel represented by Enrique Peña Nieto. So the hashtag 131 become very popular on the media, and the people start responding to another hashtag, EPN, Enrique Peña Nieto, La Ibero no te quiere, the Ibero doesn't love you, and the other one was hashtag me escondo en el baño como EPN, like EPN. And they were saying, don't worry guys, you're not alone. If you're 131, I am the 132, no? So the people were saying, we are behind you, we're supporting you, you're not alone in this, no? We feel the same way like you feel. So that's where the name 132 comes, no? I am 132, and since then, became one of the most important trending topics during the political campaigns. El EPN La Ibero no te quiere, y me escondo en el baño como EPN. So, now going back to the 4 points that you have.
Or if you want to.
Yes, well, I'm going to be kind of discussing your points. I'm making reference to the website. I want to show the video. Yes, what do you want to?
No,
Yeah. So we want to show you very quickly, because I think it's important, the website and the video of the 131 students, so you have an idea what we're talking about. So you don't think we're just like making up things here. So this is the website. You go to other resources, and you will see that we have the videos, like the most important videos of the student movement, and this is the one that we're talking about. Okay.
Well, I'm just looking forward to the nation. How much.
Students respond.
Estimados Joaquín Coswell,
De dudosa neutralidad. Usamos el derecho de réplica para desmentir. Somos estudiantes del Ibero.
No acarreados, no porros.
Y nadie nos entrenó para nada.
Y nadie nos entrenó para nada.
y nadie nos entrenó para nada.
Y nadie nos entrenó para nada. Mi nombre es María José L. Mi cuenta de alumno es 172236-9. Somos estudiantes del Ibero.
Alejandra Miranda M. 170675-8.
Alonso G. 161706-8.
Andrea G. 168653.
Soy Camila D. de la Universidad Iberoamericana, con el número de cuenta 173119-4.
Carla S. 172469-4.
Mi número de cuenta es 164977 y mi nombre es María Fernanda.
Irene L. 17750, estudiante de comunicación en la Ibero.
Well, we have 131, so it's so this is part of the idea. When you're reading the book, when the people are making reference to these specific events on the Universidad Iberoamericana, the US reader have the opportunity to go to the website and click on that video. The book is coming as an ebook very soon, but the publishing house wanted to have also a hard copy. But that's the idea, to have this kind of interactivity between the book and the website, so you can follow some of the discussions addressing this book regarding to the use of social media and some videos. So one of the most important aspects of Yo Soy 132 is what Aurelia has just talked about, that the main claim of Yo Soy 132, or the first demand of Yo Soy 132, was the democratization of media. And the most important action taken by Yo Soy 132 was the organization of this presidential debate without the intervention of mass media, which is very important, and without the intervention of other political actors, so and political parties. So you have the students like you inviting the 3-4 candidates of the presidential campaign to debate questions that the students prepared for them and that the candidates had to respond. And obviously what was very important is that it was transmitted and broadcasted through different alternative media. They had a channel on YouTube where you could follow the transmission. There was Radio 90.9 if you were on your car and you wanted to hear what was going on. And there were other kind of websites that people could follow what was really happening. Obviously, the candidate Enrique Peña Nieto didn't show up to the debate because he was feeling that the students were taking a position against him. Okay? So I think from that perspective, the democratization of the media starts with the students taking the media, opening possibilities for discussing new contents in with independent tools, using the internet, using, for example, very interesting ways of Facebook encounters. A very interesting aspect of the book is when the students are describing, because I have also included some testimonies of the students, that the Facebook was like the most important channel where they could make decisions and vote regarding decisions that they need to make, and make in a very quick way. So it was very important from that perspective, the use of Facebook. The use
in opposition of the 1968, that it was so slow.
Yeah, in opposition to what Aurelia was saying, in the 1968 student movement in Mexico, you had to be pretty much in an assembly where all the people were speaking, all the people were talking, and after 8-10 hours, they come up with a decision. With the student movement, everything was really, really quick and really fast. So the Facebook webpage was a very important aspect to make this kind of organization faster and much more dynamic. Another important aspect of the media is that they construct like their own media. They have like their own political program, which was done by the elite artists from the movement, a group of students from cinema schools who were pretty much doing interviews during that time, and the kind of information that they were getting from what was happening, it was completely different to the mass media conglomerates who were kind of informing what was going on in that specific moment. The use of Twitter was another very important aspect for student mobilizations. And let me tell you like some specific moments where it was important. When the students were marching, and when they feel that in the marches and in the demonstrations, there were people coming out, not from the student movement, but from other parts, and seemed to be suspicious, they were tweeting messages among them saying, "Be careful, I have just seen somebody with a walkie-talkie and dark glasses entering the demonstration," which were the infiltrators. And infiltrators were disruptors paid by the government to create this kind of sense of chaos and transforming a pacific movement into a violent movement by reacting with violence. So Twitter, from that perspective, was a very important medium to keep informed during the demonstrations. The same when they were projecting, for example, in public spaces. They were projecting and broadcasting videos in open spaces like Televisa, and they were using the Twitter to send the link of how to get access to the broadcasting of what was happening to the people that were not, like me, in that specific moment in Televisa following the protest. No? So doing this kind of live broadcasting was very, very important, and Twitter was you could follow it through the specific links that they were sending. What you were describing also, and I think it's really important, this kind of encounter, the Yo Soy 132, it's a very beautiful movement because two different political cultures emerge in a specific moment. in the Mexican history. The students who have never been involved in politics before, who said that it was the first time I was marching, it was the first time I was demonstrating, it was the first time I was taking the streets for a political cause. And other people who were coming from other kind of political culture, who were participating in the UNAM strike in 1999, who were the sons of the 1968 student leaders, or who have been following this kind of political or new ways of doing politics in their specific universities. So from that perspective, you have this kind of connection between collectivistas, like the people that claim that they were only activists on the media, and the social activists who were taking the streets in that specific time. So the interaction was very special because the social activists were helping the cyber activists to feel what was going out and taking the streets and having the feeling that marching with your best friend in the streets was something important and it needs to be done to demonstrate the power of the people and the bodies in the streets. And the social activists were helped by the cyber activists to open the webpage, to learn how to use the Twitter, and also to become much more aware of how to transmit political messages through mass media, through independent media, I'm sorry. So the combination of both cultures I think was very, very special. Also, it was problematic because even though during the presidential campaigns they were trying to make this case and to stop Peña Nieto from becoming president, in the moment that Enrique Peña Nieto won the election, they separate and they break, and they had like two very different political agendas from that perspective. So from that point of view, I think it's important to make that kind of connection between this relationship between cyber activists and social activists who were taking the streets. What you were describing about Encounter, I think it's very important because it is in the plaza, in the street, where you find your real inner self as part of the demonstration. The mass media, it's important, it helps to organize, it helps to coordinate, it helps to call for people to attend the mobilizations, to participate. It's a very important way to foster this kind of energy, but the real spirit of the mobilization is in the streets. So the politics of the encounter happen when you are in the streets. People feel the happiness in the streets. People start acting like if they were free when they are in the streets marching for a cause. People meet one of their best friends in the streets when they are like fighting for a specific political ideal.
Or make friends. Or make friends.
Or make friends in those specific moments. So the social media from that perspective, it's important for creating this kind of connectivity or interconnectivity that you were describing, but the real encounter happens in the streets of the cities where you can really express with your emotions what is really happening, which is another important topic that I wanted to address in the book. The emotions as part of the new social movements become very, very much important for Yo Soy 132 because I am claiming that it's one of the very few student movements with a lot of hope on their messages. And I want to show you, for example, in some of their videos, so I'm going to be kind of showing you. The reason I wanted to show you the video is because for me this is the moment that at least Yo Soy 132 is kind of opening itself from the student movement to the social movement. No? We're not students anymore, we need you. And if you see the video, that paying specific attention to the details of the hands, of the faces, of the body of people that are not students who live in different parts of the city or away from the city, it's a very important aspect of this kind of collective identity that Yo Soy 132 tried to establish. And another important aspect that you were describing is that how the Yo Soy 132, or if Yo Soy 132 was able to change certain things in the country. And I think that one of the most important and difficult ways to approach a student movement is by asking the activists, so what had happened with Yo Soy 132? What was like the transformation that Yo Soy 132 did in the public sphere if Enrique Peña Nieto won the elections and at the end the this kind of demand of the democratization of the media is still in process. And I hear like many responses from them. Some people are very critical about the Justice 132, and they feel it was a complete failure. Even some activists from the student movement. Some of them claim that we will see like the transformations and the impact of Justice 132 in the future, like in the 1968 student movement, that now we, or most of us, claim that el movimiento del 68, el movimiento del 68 was like the moment where the democratization of the country started, but it's something that after many years we were able to see. So my claim is that Justice 132, even though it is not there anymore as it was before, it transformed into something very special. Because, for example, one of the reasons, and you were mentioning a lot Ayotzinapa, is that I was kind of thinking when I was finishing the book, like, how did Justice 132 contribute to what is now happening in Mexico in terms of how we are remembering the 43 students, what kind of actions are we taking. And I find out that one of the reasons that the Ayotzinapa movement is still very alive and it has caused this kind of international and global repercussion, it was because that most of the networks that the Justice 132 open in the social media keep very active. And keep very active in different countries, for example, in the United States, in London, in Spain, in Germany. And that's something that it's very special, because you don't see that with many other movements. Even though they are not working anymore as Justice 132 as an assembly, they started those networks and those people tweeting since the student movement Justice 132 emerged. And they continue tweeting to keep up with some social aspects of what is happening in the country of Mexico. No? They're like tweeting about the students disappear. They were tweeting about the 28,000 disappears that we have in the country. They were tweeting, for example, Renuncia Peña Nieto, Quit Peña Nieto, which was one of the most important demonstrations of citizenship, that we are tired of Enrique Peña Nieto, that we don't want Enrique Peña Nieto to be the president of Mexico, and requesting his resignation in the social media. So from that perspective, the Justice 132 keeps working in the sphere of social media. And they are also working in the streets. For example, all the videos that you have seen, and if you had a chance to go to the website, they have a very interesting aesthetic in terms of what I call this kind of hope developed in most of the videos that you will see in the webpage. And they are like now working with Ayotzinapa students. As an assembly of filmmakers of Ayotzinapa, you will see the faces of the students that were in the Justice 132. So what for me is very important is that the students, they don't quit in terms of they just leave the student movement and become state bureaucrats, or they become kind of lawyers, or they continue doing this kind of politics that they were opposing during all these months in Mexico. But they will continue working with independent media. They continue working with small groups of friends, developing new projects on different kind of spaces. They have been developing work on the, for example, non-profit organizations. And for me, that's like a major change in politics in Mexico, that you have a generation of students that continue working not under the umbrella of the name of Justice 132, but with the influence of Justice 132 in the political actions. And they have been able to zoom to Ayotzinapa. They have been able to work with los zapatistas in Chiapas. They have been able to work with las policías comunitarias in Michoacán. So you see that kind of continuity in the ideology and in the work of art that has been developed by many of them. And finally, what I consider that is very important, you were describing that, is the kind of power of representation. And this kind of question that you were raising in the internet is an emancipatory tool or the opposite. And I think I am part of the people that claim that I have this super optimistic approach to the internet, because for the first time, citizens are able to represent themselves the way they feel that they need to be represented. we were living for many years under the representation of the political parties, of the unions, of the mass media conglomerates, and the internet and the social media opens the possibility for citizens to participate in politics when there was a time when they were completely neglected for that kind of participation. Obviously, it has its pros and cons. The participation, it's different from one person to another, but the possibility is there. The possibility to take action from social media has become one of the most important aspects of contemporary social movements. Think about the Arab Spring, think about the Indignados in Spain, Occupy Wall Street. So I cannot really imagine nowadays a social movement without social media as part of their core of organization, as part of their core of calling for action for different citizens. So from that perspective, I think that and I'm very positive that the internet is an emancipatory tool. In spite of all the surveillance that has been going on in Mexico, not only in the streets, people are afraid to go out and march and demonstrate in the streets since December 1st of 2012. Many of the students, they don't feel safe anymore to demonstrate in the streets, and some others feel that they have been having this surveillance of their internet profiles on Facebook, on their cell phones, and that has caused also a lot of stress and anxiety for many activists in Mexico who are demonstrating. So from that perspective, that the government, yeah. So that's another important aspect. The book, Aurelia is mentioning that there was a very famous case of 5 people who were murdered in Mexico City in 2015. It was a journalist, Rubén Espinosa, and an activist, an anthropologist. Her name was Nadia Vera. Nadia was living in Jalapa, in the state of Veracruz. She was very active for Yo Soy 132, and she was also very active with Yo Soy 132 in Jalapa, and he was very critical of the government of the governor of Veracruz. Nadia decided to move to Mexico City, and the journalist Rubén Espinosa they moved to, and in an apartment where they were spending some time together with 3 other people, they were killed. Them, the 2 of them, and 3 more people who were in that meeting. So before dying, Nadia left a very important message on the web saying that she was making responsible the governor of Veracruz of anything that could happen to her. And when she was killed, that message from the media became like very viral in terms of what kind of democracy we have in Mexico. That even moving to Mexico, she was persecuted, she was criminalized, and she was murdered by, we think, by the...
Presumably,
yeah.
By the governor
Yeah.
of Veracruz.
So from that point of view, the book is dedicated to her. I never had a chance to meet her, I never had a chance to talk to her, I never had a chance to know what she was doing in Veracruz, but for me, the kind of work and the kind of spirit of Nadia and the reason I have been feeling so much empathy on her, it was through social media. When I was listening to her interviews, when I was listening to her political clarity, for me it was somebody very, very special, and even though I never met her, I decided that the book was dedicated to her because of her struggle in Mexico for a better democracy in the country and for social justice, human rights respect, etc. So I think I would like to hear more from you. If there are any questions, I can spend all day talking about the book because it's a very meaningful book for me because it was something that put me in contact with many special people that it's hard to find if you don't have this kind of encounter in the streets, no? So, I don't know if you have questions. Chip?
Has the movement or others like it resulted in change at the state or province government level at least, not the national level?
No, well, what the most important changes that the Associación is still working on, and it's kind of developing right now, is that there's like a completely different relationship between citizens and mass media. Citizens have become much more critical of mass media representations, and one important aspect is the crisis of Televisa that is living right now. Televisa's audiences have fallen down since 2012. People feel that they are manipulating information, that there's this kind of relationship between political power and media power. So I think that the kind of change that Yo Soy 132 promote in the country was the relationship between citizens and the mass media conglomerates in the country. There are much more criticism against the mass media, but not a change on kind of politics, on the level of politics that you could claim that Yo Soy 132 produced. They have been working on a democratization of media law and a regulation, but that law hasn't been approved. But they worked for a long time on that specific policy.
Un comentario, voy a decir en español.
Sí.
Como mexicana, yo sé toda la corrupción que existe, tanto del gobierno como de las televisoras, principalmente de las que mencionaste. ¿Qué tan afectada puede llegar a ser la vida profesional de estos chicos? Porque Televisa no ha destruido solamente la vida de ciertos artistas o de ciertas personas, sino ha destruido la vida de muchos, incluido todo el pueblo, que ha quedado en un rezago educativo e intelectual tremendo. ¿Tú conociste algunos de ellos?
Yeah.
¿Sí?
There's a very important, the paper that I like the most of all the 11 papers of the book, it was written by a lawyer, by a student activist from la UNAM. The title of the paper is El día en que todos fuimos presos, the day that we were all prisoners. And his work is connected and related to the defense of the political prisoners, la defensa de los presos políticos, of December 1st, 2012. On December 1st, 2012, 56 young people were taken to jail by police authorities without any proofs that they were disturbing or creating some kind of disastrous actions in downtown Mexico. They were just protesting in a very pacific way the arrival of Enrique Peña Nieto as president. So Guillermo Alan Naranjo Estrada, whose lawyer, he's working, or he worked on the chronicle of what happened that day, and what was for him, being a young activist and a young lawyer, to have his first case in this kind of solidarity with other lawyers to defend the political prisoners of December 1st, 2012. And he claims that one of the most difficult things that he had to deal with was with the criminalization of the social protesters. No? The mass media were claiming for putting the protesters on jail for many years. They were kind of talking really bad things about their families. They were also misrepresenting some of them and creating these kind of strategies who were connected and related to the infiltrated people. So you have infiltrated people creating violence in the streets of Mexico, and that was pretty much what they were trying to do, no? To put the infiltrators as the political prisoners when the political prisoners were protesting pacifically. So from that perspective, yes, the mass media have been very tough by the way they are representing students. And another important aspect is that most of these people who were in jail during a certain amount of time on December 1st is that when they came out, they feel that there was fear for them to protest again. You lose the confidence, your body becomes much more fearful, you become much more vulnerable, and I think that's one of the most important aspects that the Mexican government tried to put on the society, the vulnerability. So we feel much more vulnerable now when people are protesting in Mexico, and that's something that started since December 1st, 2012.
So elements from this movement, I find a lot of similarities between the Bernie Sanders Field of Burn movement. Could you kind of compare the two?
Well, I think it's something I find out very interesting about Bernie Sanders is he was like taking many of the demands of the Occupy Wall Street movement, no? Like we are 99%. This kind of everybody needs to work in order to build a different political system, which is what I'm pretty much saying on the book on alternative politics, no? Which obviously Bernie Sanders was looking for a position as president in this country, and they were this kind of way to promote democracy through voting for Bernie Sanders. But he was also trying to promote another kind of democracy from the perspective of organize with your friends in school, no? Search for a change, look for other alternatives and other ways of participating, not in this kind of very restrictive liberal framework of democratic participation, no? That it's only through political parties or through institutions. So from that perspective, I think that the connection that you may see with Bernie Sanders is when Bernie Sanders adopted many of the demands of the Occupy Wall Street movement, which was like a very close movement to Yo Soy 132. There's even a very beautiful video when they put together like all the movements of the time el Yo Soy 132, el Occupy Wall Street, the Arab Spring, el que se vayan todos in Argentina. So it's like this kind of collage of movements. So from that perspective, I think that you could see that kind of interconnection because of the appropriation of Bernie Sanders' speech on the demands of the Occupy Wall Street movement. Anybody?
I guess when I go back to the topic of media, because as you mentioned in your comments, one of the central demands was the democratization of the media, and I'm preoccupied in about the ways of how power fights back. In this case, well, going back to Mexico and the situation that's happening to Mexico, and something that I see that is kind of giving some hope is all the grassroots journalism that is emerging. But at the same time, I wonder to what extent in Mexico the main problem is being caused by the two main television companies, TV Azteca and Televisa, because you had the whole scandal with Carmen Aristegui recently, and how she was basically removed from radio. So I don't want to, and I'm busy, as someone who is concerned with activism in Mexico, I don't want to lose hope. At the same time, sometimes you feel these moments of helplessness, because yes, you have all these movements emerging, and it is true that the government or the state fights back. So I wonder if you can put into context the case that happened with Aristegui and the whole fight that she has with Peña Nieto, and how she exposed the Casablanca situation, and what if you see some kind of future for other forms, like we might have, and the hope is in the democratization of social media. But is there any hope for the extension of that democratization to corporate media in Mexico? So what would be your hopes or your thoughts on that? And the other thing, I guess, very quickly will be, I just want to, because I also was optimistic when all the Ayotzinapa movement was calling for Peña Nieto to resign. They were calling even for revolution, something which in Mexico at least was not very prominent, but when the marches in Ayotzinapa took place, we started to hear back again this idea of revolution. And you put it in context with the Arab Spring, which is another kind of revolution. But they call for Peña Nieto to resign, and he stays. Has he, has this, well, I wonder if you can say something about your thoughts on his own position as the leader of Mexico. Has he proved himself invincible or something like that towards all these attacks, which increasingly they seem greater and greater, and yet he remains?
So I'm going to start with the latest comment, because I think it's important. In September 15, there was a huge demonstration in Mexico, in other cities, in Mexico City and other cities in the country, that was called by citizens to ask for the resignation of Enrique Peña Nieto, based on many scandals, no? Scandals of corruption of the government, the 28,000 disappeared people in the country since he took control of the administration of the country, the 43 students of Ayotzinapa, the massacres of Tlatlaya and other massacres that have been Nochistlán, and the attacks to the professors in Oaxaca. And the latest scandal was the visit of Donald Trump to Mexico, which was like the moment that the Mexican society exploded. Interestingly, we were like tolerating violence, but the moment that Donald Trump was in Mexico was pretty much like the moment that people decided that enough was enough. No? So my concern with the president, I'm not going to say my president because he doesn't represent me, is that he doesn't know what is happening around him. He lives in a bubble. He has been very bad. He doesn't have like people to tell him what is really happening in the country. A very good example of what I'm telling you and describing you is every year in Mexico, the president needs to bring a report of what had happened in the year. And there were no references to the Ayotzinapa students. There were no references to the 28,000 disappeared. It was a discussion with the youth that he selected. It was not even the ex-members of the Asociación Treintados or the youth of Ayotzinapa or the youth that is more politically active in the country. It was the youth that it was selected by its political staff to have a conversation, a discussion where there was nothing meaningful on the discussion. So I think that's like the main problem of his administration. He doesn't know what does the people feel about himself. No? He has created this kind of veil to avoid any kind of critique against him, and he thinks that the country is going through the right path with the initiativas, with the political initiatives that he stated from the beginning of his government in terms of the privatization of the energy, the privatization of education, etc. No? So from that perspective, I think he's completely blind from that point of view. The other problem that I see with the mass media and also is that even though that the access of the internet in Mexico has increased in the last years, because you don't need to have a computer to have access, you need to have a computer at home to have access to the internet through your cell phone, is that the use of the internet in Mexico is still very much connected to creating social relationships with your friends, with your family. No? There's still a lot of things to do through political projects and use of social media. I think also, which is important, you were describing about the impact of journalist chronicles, which is something Aurelia and I are very much concerned, is that what has happened is at least they are dignifying the victims. We are able to know and humanize the victims. We are able to know the names of the victims, of who are dying, why are they dying, the kind of work done by mothers that you're doing in Ciudad Juarez, and the kind of work that has been done by other relatives in the country searching for their missing ones. It's important, and the work of the journalist from that perspective, creating the empathy and solidarity, it's necessary for the families to keep this kind of hope, but also to feel that they are recovering some kind of dignity that had been lost by the mass media. And the other issue that you're describing is that with the mass media, it's very difficult to regulate the contents of Televisa and Telazteca. It's very much impossible, I would say, to put the hand on the contents of both TV stations. But you can create a third concession for media, because we have like other TV stations that are administered by the government, and they do better programs and they have like better contents. But if you create an alternative station that has the power to be regulated by citizens, I think that could be a major achievement in the country. Yeah, which is what the Yo Soy 132 was trying to establish, no? That the citizens have the control of the contents that they were representing and screening on TV. So I would be, and I'm continuing being optimistic from that perspective, because even though we haven't reached that point, the independent media that we have in Mexico right now is exceptional, no? It's something that is constantly growing. It's something that has been experimenting changes in the past 4 or 5 years. And it's something that is creating also a very important addition of young people who are interested on politics and are interested on journalism and communications, and develop new ways of informing citizens through other specific mediums. No? Tomás, tenías.
Well, I just want to go back to the comparison we were making between Bernie Sanders and Yo Soy 132. So I think that, of course, it was very positive that Bernie Sanders was listening to what people were saying, and I think that was a positive thing. But in the case of Yo Soy 132, we need to emphasize that it is, it was not connected to any political party, and we can say that the political party system in Mexico is broken. So we don't feel represented, as you have said, by any party. And I think Yo Soy 132, one of the positive things that emerged from this movement was that many people, not just students, but many people realized that they were not represented, that they could participate in politics in different ways, and that in fact they had the right to even become candidates themselves, because as you remember, during these times there have been several initiatives saying that, well, people just like you and me can become candidates, and they don't have to belong to any party. So then there have been many candidates, or not many, but a few candidates that are independent, and that movement has grown. So now, for example, probably it is not the best example, but the governor of Nuevo León, the state of Nuevo León, he's an independent. He was an independent candidate. Probably he's not the best governor, but we can say that these kinds of movements, independent politics, is growing. And as for the protest on September 15th, well, in recent days, it was really organized on the mass, on social media. So many people found out about this protest because of the social media, and they went to the demonstration because they found out that if there was that demonstration by the social media. So I think it's part of the results and the effects of this movement in a certain way.
What Thomas is saying, it's very interesting, because it has always been, or I think it's still something that happens in Mexico. There's this kind of stigmatization of social movements transforming into political parties, for example. So what Tomás is saying, it's important because they are independent candidates who have run for elections and they have won. You give the example of El Bronco in Nuevo León. Yeah, but Pedro Kumamoto in Jalisco, I think it's a much more positive example, which is a young guy of 29, 30 years old, independent candidate who emerged from these structures of youth who have been searching for political actions, and is very well prepared from that perspective. And yes, I think it's important what you're saying, that the Yo Soy 132, when they established their manifesto, they claim to be a non-partisan movement, but a political movement, which is important to make the difference. Movimiento político, apartidista.
Yes, can you please comment on the role of Spanish language media in the United States, Spanish language mass media, and also like Chicano, smaller scale media in the United States in that conversation with the diaspora community? One particular example, a Univision anchor did investigative reporting and found a painting that was bought by the Trump Foundation misappropriating funds that are supposed to be for charity. And it played...
They didn't contribute to their own charity.
Yes, and they did contribute their own charity. And this played into the whole conversation surrounding Donald Trump and Enrique Peña Nieto.
Well, what I can tell you, and I'm much more aware of, is that Yo Soy 132 in the United States had like a lot of sympathizers. And the assembly, Yo Soy 132, San Francisco Bay, was very active. And the way they were like communicating with Yo Soy 132 in Mexico, this is something very interesting, is that they were emerging at the same time other assemblies in the rest of the country, but also abroad. And from the perspective of these assemblies, they were kind of contacting the Yo Soy 132 in Mexico City. So what's next? What is like the next action? Or how can we develop like our structure? So the Yo Soy 132 in Mexico City find out that they couldn't really establish like a political program for everyone. So what they decided was like, come on, like be independent, no? Like do and focus on the topics that are concerning more in your community. If in your community you don't have the problem of the mass media or it's not like a major problem, focus on other aspects. For example, Yo Soy 132 Ciudad Juárez, they were focusing on femicides and they were focusing on the militarization of the border, which was much more a concern of the members of Yo Soy 132 in Juárez than the members of Yo Soy 132 in Mexico City. So from that perspective, I can claim that the experience of every assembly of Yo Soy 132 in the world was much more related to the political moment that they were living. For example, the Spaniards, the 15M and the Yo Soy 132, because they joined forces, no? And in that specific moment of Yo Soy 132 in 2012, they were fighting with the 15M because they were losing many people their homes in that time of economical crisis in Spain. So, and in other kind of cases, for example, in other countries, like for example in Chile, they were very much supporting the student mobilizations in the country. So they were living pretty much like the political moment, and that's why the mass media demand was pretty much the democratization of the mass of the media was more connected and related to the body of Yo Soy 132 of Mexico City from that perspective. No? You want to say something?
Yeah. In this sense, I think, yeah, I want to connect this my comment with what you've been saying and the discussion. If we are looking for analyzing the movement and the success, how successful was the movement with traditional patterns of social movement, so we're going to find out that, oh, it didn't work, it's just ephemeral, and it, like all social movements, they have a peak and they go down, so like, okay, they finished and that's it, done. And what was the outcomes? Oh, well, a little bit, but not much, but we didn't have, like Peña Nieto is still the president, was elected, and now is still the president, therefore it's not successful. And I think that that would be for me the right approach for seeing that. I think like this is part of many other movements that they are happening, and they are more flexible and fluent than just a label or a name or something. As you said, so some people were participating in the Asociación 32, and now they dispersed, and now they're moving in a different way than before. So I think this is a different way of organizing, and therefore we need a different way to explore or analyze that. And in that sense, I want to come back to this thought of the aleatory encounter. So there's nothing taken for granted that this is going to happen or not. So like everything is like kind of ransom, and it's just like a miracle it happened, but also it's you could not foretell that was going to happen with Yo Soy 132. You could not foretell all the reaction or what all the little pieces that are moving as an effect of that uprising. And I find a lot of connections with what happened with EZLN as well. And then I found, this is my favorite piece of Subcomandante Marcos, that is called, this is a section of the memory and the burial key of history. And this is a little section that is called the underground currents of critical resistance. And he's describing all this resistance all around the world, and he makes a metaphor with the moles, the topos. So I'm going to read this little piece. The kidnapping of history by the elite is meant to remodel its consumption in order to make the human being's fundamental patrimony, memory, disappear. Today is the new tyrant. It is to it that one swears alliance and obedience. But all over the world, moles of every color and size rummage in the hidden history and find and understand. Every so often, these moles emerge and open holes of underground light that illuminate the ground surface grays of neoliberal chaos. It must be understood that the constant emergence of these moles scandalously coincides with the appearance of social mobilizations. And these defy to establish order because they also defy the modern political endeavors. The intruders of politics stalk behind every corner of history. And that I wanted to finish with this reflection over what has been happening with Yo Soy 132, and I think there is this current, underground current that connects uprising of the ZLN in the 94, or the guerrillas in the 70s, the 68 movement, the September 23rd, it was the uprising of a guerrilla in the 1965 in Mexico. So that everything is, I think at some point it connects, and the Yo Soy 132 and the current resistance supporting the Ayotzinapa relatives of the students disappearing in Ayotzinapa, or the 28,000 disappeared people. So I think it's everything connected, and it is this encounter that sometimes it happens, sometimes not. So that's the one we have to look for and analyze, and I think to value what are the possibilities of change in that border. And I think anytime it's happening, this possibility. So it's also in our hands, I think. So I'm idealist.
Dice un dicho que pobre México, tan lejos de Dios y tan cerca de los Estados Unidos. Desde el 2008 han entrado 3.5 billones de dólares a los Estados Unidos por el Plan Mérida, que ahora se llama Plan México. Y Peña Nieto no la mayoría votaron por él, sino fue un presidente impuesto por las televisoras. Y ahora mismo le han dado un reconocimiento hace 15 días aproximadamente en Estados Unidos. Realmente no está funcionando para nosotros como mexicanos, pero está funcionando para los intereses extranjeros. Y qué pena que la mayoría de los ciudadanos americanos no se dan cuenta de que su gobierno está enviando y está produciendo toda este caos a México porque necesita seguir protegiendo los intereses de estas empresas.
One very quick question. I just wanted to ask you about the cover of the.
Yeah, sure.
It has the Santo figure.
Es un Blue Demon. No, let me explain you that.
So why?
The creator is Marco Bulgo, and the wrestler is Blue Demon, which is one of the most emblematic figures of wrestling in Mexico. He was like the partner with El Santo, and the photograph comes from one book by Lourdes Grobet, which is a photographer on wrestling in Mexico, one of the most important photographers. We have taken photos of wrestlers in the arena and in their homes. And this picture was taken by Blue Demon hitting a car. So what the designer did was switching the car from the movie that Blue Demon was kind of hitting, putting the television, which I think was like a very smart way to somehow make a claim on what was Jesús Santos searching for. And he was a cartel during the protests, and I really like him. And it was also the cartel that they choose for the poster that they choose for the second anniversary of Jesús Santos in La UNAM. So I met with the designer, and he agreed to use his design for the cover of the book without charging any money, and Lourdes Grobet also agreed that we could use her image without any kind of money to pay her. So that's where the image comes from.
Very lucky.
Yeah, no, and he was exceptional, and every time I need to use that image, he gives me the right to use it. So thank you very much